At this point in the tutorial, you should have completed your build. You should have added all of your controls and the appropriate images. The next step then is going to be to code some of our buttons to allow us to navigate from one window to the other. So in order for us to do that, I'm going to go into Joke1. I'm going to choose an action, and I'm going to code this button accordingly. So the first thing is simply showing and hiding the windows that we have. This code is really simple. My first window that I'm currently on is called Window 1. And when I click on this button, I want to simply hide Window 1, so it will disappear. Now, it's linking me to Window 2, which is where the punchline for my first joke exists. So I'll simply code that, window2.show. Very simple, very common sense. Let's back out, and let's play this and see what we actually get. So here's our screen. We click on button 1, and it shows me button 2. Perfect. Now I'll click on this button, which has been coded very similarly, except in the opposite direction. I click on it, and I go back to the joke factory. All right, so there's your simple code to link your buttons together. However, if you remember, in my example, I did something a little fancier in that it wasn't simply hiding and showing. It was navigating from one window to another and showing you a message box in between that had a secondary message added to it. So I'm simply going to remark these two bits of code. I'll leave them there so you can see them. And I'm going to add some more code. So this time we're going to create a message box, and in that message box there's going to be option choices, yes or no. And those choices need to be taken into consideration when we actually do our navigation. So I'm going to start by creating a variable. And I'm going to simply use n, and we're going to define that variable as an integer. And that is because my yes and no options in my message box hold numerical values. And that will make more sense in just a second. So we're going to now say n, the variable we have created, is going to equal the message box. And in the message box, I'm going to now have the ability to type a message. So I'm going to type in the code that I had telling you how wonderful my joke was. So this stuff is gold, a bit of a reference to old Jerry Seinfeld comedy. Do you want to know the punchline? Question mark. Now here's another concept I'm going to throw at you, and this will make more sense the more you do it. I'm going to put in here a numerical value that's going to represent the way the message box looks. So right now I'm going to put in 52, and I'm going to just stop for a second. I'm going to minimize this screen and show you information that's behind this. When I create a message box, I need to define the way that message box looks and behaves by a numerical value. And that numerical value is simply the sum of a number of different primary values that are attached to various features in the message box. So for me to define that message box, I simply add up all the values of the options that I want, and I use that as the value to define my button. So in the example I've just used, I used number 52. So this is the option I'm using for my code for joke 1. So I have chosen a caution triangle icon as the option that shows up. And on this little box right here, it shows you all the different icons that you can call up. Windows has some variety, Linux has some variety. Unfortunately, for the Mac operating system, the variety is pretty poor. So I've chosen this one here just so I can see something a little bit different. So if I want this icon to show up, that is called the caution icon, triangle icon, that's number 48. So I'm going to start with my value at 48, and I'm going to add to it. So I also want simply yes and no buttons in my message box, and that has a value of 4. So I'm going to add 48 and 4, and I'm going to scroll down to the third option box, and I can choose the default button. That is the button, if I simply hit the enter key, that's the one that will be applied. So the first button is 0 value, the second button in your grouping is a 256 value, the third button is a 512 value, and if you want no default buttons, you add 768. So since I've chosen a yes and no buttons, I want the yes to be the default value, so that is the first button in the group. So that has a value of 0. So I come back to my list, so I have 48 plus 4 plus 0 equals 52. Now I've got another example here for you, and all of this information that you're seeing on the screen is next listed in the tutorial, so you can go back to it at any point in time. So I now have my code set, and I have my value of my button at 52. So we'll jump back here. So there we have n equals message box, the contents I want in my message box, and the value to define the way my message box looks. Now the next step is simply an if-then statement. If n equals 6, then I want something specific to happen. Now you're going to say, why 6? Okay, I'll explain that also. I'm going to jump back to the information that is in your tutorial next on the video. I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see here, associated with the type of buttons you want in your message box, are values associated with each one of those buttons. So I said if n equals 6, and that is the yes value button. So that means if n equals 6, the user has pressed the yes button. So what do I want to have happen when the yes button is pressed? And I'll jump back to the video in just a second, but this one says 7 value is equal to the no button pressed. So I'm going to utilize 6 and 7 as my possible if-then outcomes. So if n equals 6, that means they've pressed the yes button. So do they want to see the punchline? Yes, they do. What do I want to do at this point? Window1.hide and window2.show. And this is the exact same code we used to navigate earlier without the fancy message box. Now, just like you would have in BASIC, we now need to use an else. However, slightly different here. It's else if n equals 7, then what is our outcome going to be? So in XOJO, we're using an if, then, else if, as opposed to if, then, else. We will have our end if at the end like we normally do. So this time what I want to have happen is show me what's going to happen for the no option. So if they say no, I want to continue showing window 1 and window 2, which is where the joke is. They've said they don't want to see it. I'm just going to simply hide. Now I could probably make that a little bit easier, but I want to stick with the hide show code so you'll get used to it. And then we end if. All right, so let's jump out and take a look and see how this works for us. So I'm going to run my code. Oh, looks like I have an error. All right, what did I forget to do? Oh, I forgot to put my quotations after. I think I've done that before in a previous tutorial. Forget the end of my quotations. So we'll try this one more time. And we're compiling. Looks good. All right, so here's my activity now. So before I had simply the hide and show options in here and it jumped right to the other window. This time I click on it. This stuff is gold. Do you want to know the punchline? So there's the text I typed in. If I choose no, it will leave me right back showing window 1 and hiding window 2. If I try that again and I say yes, my positive response option, there's window 2, window 1 has been hidden. So I'm going to jump back here. My code to go back is simply hide and show. I avoid the message box. And I'm going to go ahead and code similar options into joke 2. Are you sure you want to hear this? It is really bad. Yes, I want to hear it. And there's joke 2. I jump straight back to window 1. And I have another message box for option 3. And I jump straight back. Okay, so let's stop this. And there you see options. I'm going to put another remark in here just so we're very clear. So this is going to be user pressed yes as their option. And this is going to be no as their option. Okay, so positive response value equals 6. negative response value equals 7. I would like you, in your example of this, to choose some different options for the images and the options available in your message box. So you're going to have to go through and try and decipher the values of those numbers. Show me something a little different. Show me that this makes sense to you. And again, that information that you're going to need is all in your tutorial right after the video. There we have your options to establish the value of your message box. There we have the icons, how it's actually going to look. And here we have the possible outcomes from their choices, values ranging from 1 to 7. All right, good luck with that. Call me over when it's finished and let me see how your finished product looks and behaves.